Winter had once again pinned the city to the ground with its heavy hand. The snow didn't sparkle, it was gray, like wet cotton wool piled up in drifts along the roadsides. The streetlights illuminated the streets not with light, but with weariness, and it seemed as if the whole world was about to collapse into itself. I got a call in the evening. The voice trembled as if the person was speaking not into the phone, but from underwater. The woman claimed that her shadow was behaving strangely. I thought, alcohol, loneliness, a nervous breakdown. But there was something in her words that I couldn't dismiss like cigarette smoke. "It's lagging behind," she said. I walk across the room, and the shadow stays in place. And watches. I listened and felt something tighten in my chest. Not from fear, but from recognition. In the morning, I went to the address. A Khrushchev-era building on the edge of the neighborhood, windows fogged up, doors peeling. The stairwell smelled of smoke and cat urine, like all these buildings. She was waiting for me on the third floor, pale, in a robe, her eyes tired from insomnia. "Look," she whispered, leading me into the room. Her shadow fell on the wall. It was moving, but not in sync. The woman raised her hand, and her reflection hesitated for a second, as if wondering whether to repeat the movement. I stepped closer. The light bulb on the ceiling was flickering, but that didn't explain the delay. I squinted, and for a moment it seemed as if the shadow was looking directly at me. "See," she said, almost crying. "She's lying to me. She pretends that I am me. But I can feel that she's waiting for me to turn away." I didn't answer. I just lit a cigarette. The smoke dissolved in the cold air, and a thought echoed in my head: a shadow is not the absence of light. It's what we hide from ourselves. I was about to leave when I noticed something. There was another shadow on the wall next to her silhouette. It was slightly blurred, as if it belonged to someone else. But there was no one else in the room but us. I froze. The woman didn't notice. And the shadow smiled. I returned home late at night. The snow crunched under my boots, as if the city was chewing me up and couldn't finish. The wind tugged at my collar, trying to suffocate me with cold. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that as I walked past the houses, I kept catching myself thinking, the shadows behind the windows were moving differently. They paused for a second. They waited. Inside, doubt began to stir in me too. I took the keys out of my pocket, but my hand trembled. In the window opposite, I saw my reflection. Only it didn't repeat my movement immediately. It lagged behind for a split second. That was enough for a chill to run down my spine, not from the winter, but from within. The apartment greeted me with silence. I turned on the table lamp and stared at the wall. The shadow of my body fell on the wallpaper, stretching like a tired beast. I slowly raised my hand. The shadow froze. And only then did it repeat my movement. With a delay of one damn second. I didn't blink. I just exhaled smoke toward the ceiling and said to myself, "I'm tired. It's my nerves. Hallucinations. In this city, it's easier to believe that you don't exist than that you do." But the words sounded false, like cheap alcohol passed off as cognac. I decided to check. I stood in front of the mirror. In the reflection, I was the same as always, my face tired like city tiles, my eyes cloudy but alive. But the shadow on the wall let me down again. I turned my head to the side, it did the same, but a little later. And then something happened that I didn't want to admit. For a moment, I noticed that the shadow was smiling. Not me. It. Something clicked inside me. I turned off the light abruptly and hid in the darkness like a rat in a basement. But that only made it worse. Now the shadow was gone altogether. And with it, my peace of mind. I didn't sleep that night. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the city moaning outside, pipes creaking, drunks shouting, the wind scraping through the cracks. And it all seemed like one big breath. The breath of what now stands behind me. And a thought crept into my head: if shadows have started to lie, then what is real? In the morning, I returned to the woman. I thought, if the night was a dream, then the day would put everything in its place. But instead of clarity, I got a gray sky, drizzle, and a city that looked like a faded photograph. The entrance greeted me with a silence too thick for a normal morning. The landing smelled damp and metallic, as if someone had recently sharpened knives here. I knocked on the door. There was no answer. I stood there. My cigarette burned down to the filter. Then I broke the lock, a familiar task for those who live on both sides of the law. The door gave way. The apartment was empty. No belongings, no trace of the owner, as if no one had lived here for a long time. But I knew that yesterday a woman had been here. I saw her eyes. I heard her voice. I even felt her fear, sticky like mold on the wallpaper. I walked into the room where it all began. Light filtered through the cloudy window and fell on the bare wall. There was a shadow on the wall. A woman's shadow. With clear outlines of shoulders, a thin neck, and a face that no longer existed in this room. I froze. The cigarette almost fell out of my mouth. The shadow moved. It raised its hand, touched invisible hair, and stepped forward. But there was nothing in front of it. No one. Only a crack in the plaster, running to the floor like a scar. I sat down on the windowsill, not believing what I was seeing. I wanted to convince myself that it was a trick of the light, psychosis, an optical illusion. But no, the shadow was too confident, too alive. It turned to me. I saw the smile again. "Where are you?" I whispered, though I didn't understand who I was asking. The shadow didn't answer. It just moved, as if inviting me closer. I got up and took a step. The cold floor crunched under my boots, and my chest tightened, as if my heart was afraid of outrunning my shadow. I touched the wall with my hand. For a split second, it felt like I was touching skin. Warm. Alive. I pulled my hand away, cursed, and lit another cigarette. The smoke melted into the air, but lingered on the wall. As if the shadow was inhaling it. I realized the woman had disappeared. But her shadow remained. And now she was looking at me. And the scariest thing was that I felt that somewhere else, my own shadow was doing the same thing. Waiting for the moment when I would get distracted. I went down to the courtyard, breathing in the air that smelled of coal and melancholy. The city lived its rotten life, rare passers-by, empty eyes, old men in caps at the stalls. But inside me, I had a growing feeling that they were all shadows and that real people had long since disappeared from here. I headed to the archives. When you want to check whether a person existed, there is nothing more reliable than old cards and registrations. Paper lies less often than people. But paper also sometimes disappears. A tired clerk with eyes like two sealed light bulbs leafed through the lists with displeasure. His fingers crackled like dry twigs. "Address?" he asked. "Third floor, apartment 28, I said. "Last name?" It wasn't listed. He looked at me with irritation, but checked anyway. The pages rustled, as if voices were whispering behind them. "No one is registered there," he finally said. "How old is it?" "As old as the building. According to our records, the apartment is empty." I wanted to laugh, but the laughter stuck in my throat. I had been in that apartment. I had seen a woman. Her shadow. Shadows don't just appear out of nowhere. I insisted on a second check. They took out old books from a time when the city still believed in the future. Yellowed pages, worn spines. And again, nothing. No mentions, not a single surname, not a single hint. Maybe it's a mistake? I asked. We don't make mistakes, the clerk grumbled. We only have empty spaces. My head was ringing. I went out into the hallway, where the linoleum was worn down to the concrete and the lamps hummed as if warning me. I lit a cigarette. The smoke enveloped me, and at that moment I noticed a shadow on the wall opposite. Mine. But it lagged behind again, for a second, no more. I took a sharp step forward. The shadow remained in place, as if wondering whether to continue playing with me. And then it hit me. The woman hadn't disappeared because she had been taken away. She had disappeared because she had never existed. But her shadow remained. And now it was stuck to me like a label. I went back to the window. A cold breeze blew in from the street. I saw myself in the reflection of the glass. Only the face wasn't mine. I walked down the street and caught every reflection, in shop windows, in frozen puddles, in bus windows. They all mirrored me, but not immediately. Some were a moment behind, some were ahead, and some played their own game altogether. I looked at my own gait and realized I was no longer sure who was leading whom, my shadow or me. I had to go back to the beginning. The woman called me herself. That meant there had to be a trace of the call somewhere. I had an old tape recorder in my office that recorded conversations. I turned it on. The hiss of the tape, creaks, emptiness, and then, her voice. She's falling behind. The shadow is falling behind. I rewound it. The voice was trembling, filled with pain. But the longer I listened, the clearer I realized it wasn't her voice. It was my voice, distorted, stretched out, as if someone had passed it through someone else's mouth. I almost dropped my cigarette on the floor. The room became stuffy, even though the window was wide open. My shadow swayed on the wall. I turned around sharply and caught her off guard. She wasn't sitting like me, she was standing. And she was looking at me. I turned off the lamp. Let her disappear. But she didn't disappear. She remained, solid, like a person standing in the corner. What do you want? I asked into the darkness. There was no answer. Only the creaking of the floorboards, as if someone had taken a step. I left the apartment, slamming the door so hard that the plaster crumbled. One thought pulsed in my head: shadows are not reflections of us. They are reflections of who we could become. Or who we already are, but have forgotten. The street was empty. I wandered to the nearest payphone. I wanted to check where the call had come from. The machine buzzed, a coin clinked inside. The operator clarified the request in a sleepy voice. I dictated the date and time. Pause. A long one, as if the wires stretched across the whole world, and someone at the other end didn't want to answer. The call came, the voice faltered. From your office, Mr. Maxfer. From your phone. I froze, clutching the receiver. In the window opposite, the light from a street lamp cast my shadow. It stood with its arm raised, as if waving goodbye to me. I returned to the office. The door creaked as if it didn't recognize me. The room greeted me with darkness and the smell of cold tobacco, as if someone had been smoking here the whole time I was gone. I turned on the desk lamp. The light cast a yellow spot on the wall. And then I realized there were more shadows in the room than there should have been. My shadow was sitting on a chair, just like me. But there was another one by the window. A stranger's. Thin, elongated, as if dried out. It didn't belong to any furniture or objects. It just stood there, that's all. I stood up. The cigarette trembled in my fingers. The second shadow did the same, but its movement was slightly delayed, as if it were repeating me, not me repeating it. I went out into the hallway. The light bulb was flickering, and every time it flashed, I saw the walls around me come to life. The shadows of people who weren't there moved along their routes, smoking, laughing, waving their hands. The hollow echo of footsteps came from below, even though the building had been empty for a long time. I went down to the courtyard. There, the wind was blowing snow, and the streetlights cast long silhouettes on the asphalt. But here, too, a surprise awaited me. My shadow had split. Now there were two of them. One walked right behind me, the other slightly to the side, as if checking to see if I was turning. I quickened my pace. So did they. My chest grew cold. I turned into an alley where the walls were peeling and trash was hidden in the snowdrifts. The alley was narrow, and the light from the street lamp illuminated everything clearly. I took a step forward. So did my shadows. But there, on the wall, there were now 3 of them. I stopped. I smoked quickly, not tasting anything. "Who are you?" I exhaled. No one answered. But the shadow on the far right took a step forward, even though I was standing still. It looked at me. I couldn't explain how I knew. I just knew, it was looking. I stepped back. My heels slipped on the ice. And at that moment, a thought popped into my head. If they started living separately, which one of us is real? The shadows froze. Only one continued to move. She took out a cigarette and lit it, without any hands, without any fire. And the smoke crept upward, toward the sky. And I realized that I was no longer sure whether it was me holding the cigarette to my lips. There was one person in town whom I could still trust. An old photographer named Lazarus. He had a studio on the corner where the street ended in a vacant lot. His shop window had long since faded, the glass was cracked, but inside it still smelled of developer and wet paper. I came to see him late in the evening. The light bulb above the door glowed yellow, and that light seemed more alive than anything I had seen in the last few days. "Maxfer," Lazarus said, greeting me. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "Worse," I replied. "I saw myself." We went inside. The walls were covered with photographs, old portraits, faded landscapes, black and white faces that had long since decayed in the ground. Lazarus fiddled with an enlarger, and I walked among the photographs as if among someone else's memories. "I need to check something," I said. "Do you still shoot on film?" "Of course." "Digitalize more often?" He smiled his usual toothless smile and took out an old Zenit. I stood by the wall. I clicked the shutter. I clicked again. Lazar put the film in the developer, his hands moving with practiced precision. When he hung the first print to dry, I realized I shouldn't have done that. It was me in the picture. A cigarette in my teeth, my eyes already clouded from insomnia. But behind me was not just one shadow. There were 3. Clear, dense, each looking in a different direction. I swallowed. "Is this a defect?" "No," Lazar replied calmly. "This isn't the first time I've seen something like this." He took a stack of old photographs out of the closet. He threw them on the table. I opened them. People I knew. Passers-by, customers, random figures. And almost every one of them had the same picture. Shadows that didn't match their bodies. Alive, separate, sometimes smiling. "How long have you been noticing this?" I asked. "Since the city stopped breathing," he replied. At first I thought it was my mistake. But then I realized, it's them. "Who is them?" I clenched my fists. Lazar took a drag on his cigarette, and the smoke curled like a veil. "The shadows, Maxfer. They're not reflections anymore. They're the masters. And we're just a reason for them to play. I stared at the photos. One of them showed a woman in a bathrobe. The one. Only her body was barely visible, while her shadow was clear and bright, as if she were the main character in the frame. And she was smiling. I was flipping through photos, my fingers shaking as if I were turning not paper but my own nerves. Lazar was silent, only his hand-rolled cigarette crackling, leaving bitter smoke in the air. And suddenly I froze. In one photo was a familiar courtyard, peeling walls, snow-covered swings. And in the corner of the frame stood a man. Tall, in a long coat, with a cigarette. The face was blurred, but I recognized the silhouette instantly. It was me. Where did this photo come from? I asked hoarsely. Old film, about 20 years ago, Lazar shrugged. A random shot. I don't even remember who was there. 20 years ago, I didn't live in this city, I said. Maybe you didn't, he replied calmly. But you're in the photo. I looked closely. The man in the picture was indeed holding a cigarette, just like me. Even the pose was the same. But there was one detail that stabbed me like a knife. His shadow. It wasn't behind him, but in front of him. And it was smiling at the camera, as if it knew it was being photographed. I leaned back in my chair. My head was buzzing. Everything I had seen in the last few days suddenly fell into place, and I realized that I was not the main character, but only a minor one. Do you want the truth, Maxfer? Lazar said quietly. Sometimes I think that we are just shells. The real us is there, on the walls. In the shadows. Maybe they live longer. Maybe they are real life, and we are their shadows. I wanted to argue, but my tongue wouldn't obey me. I looked at the photo again. A man who looked like me was standing in the same vacant lot where I had been smoking yesterday. 20 years ago. Are you sure it's not fake? I asked. There's no need to fake it, he replied. They choose where to appear themselves. I put the photo in my pocket. Something was pounding unevenly in my chest, as if my heart was trying to break free and leave me empty. I left the workshop. Evening had fallen on the streets, and the streetlights cast long shadows. I stopped by a wall and looked at my shadow. It stood there as always. But for a moment, it seemed older than me. Too old. And for the first time, I thought, what if I am her? And everything else is just a play of light that I believed in. The wasteland greeted me with the same cold, the same land that always smelled of iron and longing. The sky hung low, like a coffin lid. The city seemed distant, as if I were standing not on the outskirts, but on the border of something bigger, where reality was thinner than air. I knew I would find him here. Don't ask, I just knew. Sometimes things attract each other like two mirrors facing each other. The snow crunched under my feet. The silence was oppressive. And suddenly I saw a silhouette. A man was standing about 20 meters away. He was wearing a long coat and smoking a cigarette, the smoke rising without dissipating. I stopped. He did the same. We stood facing each other like reflections separated by glass. Who are you? I asked. Who are you? He replied. My voice. Exactly the same. I wasn't surprised. I couldn't be. Something clicked in my head, like Lazar's camera. Everything became sharp and hopeless. Are you a shadow? Are you sure you're not? He moved closer. His steps matched mine. The wind howled, stirring up the snow. His face became distinguishable. My face. But older. Exhausted, pale, with eyes that had nothing human in them. You lived my life, Maxfer, he said. You walked my streets, smoked my cigarettes, slept in my body. And now it's time to pay back what you owe. I stepped back. That's not possible. Anything is possible if you are a shadow who decided to become human. He smiled. The same smile I had seen on walls, in mirrors, in photographs. Do you remember the woman? He asked. She was the first. The shadow who understood how to cross over. You helped her. You just didn't understand how. I was silent. The smoke burned my lungs. I've come to take what's mine, he said. You've lived someone else's life for too long. He took a step. And then I realized that my legs weren't listening to me. My shadow, the one lying beneath me, suddenly stood up. It separated. It reached out to him. The world shook. The air became viscous, like an old photo in a developer. And I saw, shadows filled everything around me. They flowed from the alleys, from the walls, from the ground. Silent, faceless, alive. Welcome home, he said. And at that moment, I realized that the city I live in never belonged to people. It belonged to them. Everything around me was shaking. The city seemed to be dissolving into smoke, and shadows were seeping out of its cracks. They moved slowly, unhurriedly, like water that had found a way out. The faces of people on the streets dissolved, leaving only black silhouettes whispering to each other. I stood in the middle of a vacant lot, between myself and my reflection. I didn't feel the cold. No wind, no snow, everything seemed to become part of a single motionless film on which someone, damn it, had filmed my end. You won't win anyway, I said. Even if you stay, it won't change anything. You're wrong, he replied calmly. Everything will change. Because the one who stays is the truth. He took a step closer. Now I could see every fold of his coat, every wrinkle. He was me. Too much like me. Even the smell, tobacco, cheap cologne, fatigue, was the same. I took out my revolver. Checked the cylinder. 1 bullet. That should be enough if I aimed correctly, where the border between light and shadow was thinnest. Do you want to stay? I asked. Then take my place. Completely. He smiled. I already have. I fired. The sound was muffled, as if the city had swallowed it. The shadow trembled but did not disappear. On the contrary, it stepped toward me and, without stopping, entered my body. The air contracted, my eyes filled with tears. Darkness spread through my veins. When I woke up, the snow had stopped falling. Everything was still. The air was clear. I got up and looked at my hands. They were slightly darker than before. My skin absorbed the light. I walked over to the broken mirror lying at the edge of the vacant lot. I looked into it. The reflection was smiling. But it wasn't me. It was it. And then I realized there was no choice. There never had been. We were just switching places, like day and night. When shadows get tired of lying, they become the ones who created them. I lit a cigarette. The ash fell on the snow, leaving no trace. In the distance, the city hummed, as if moaning, as if giving birth to new versions of us. When shadows lie, I said, it means that one of us has told the truth. And I walked away. Without a reflection. Without doubts. With the feeling that maybe now I was the real one. Or maybe just the next shadow. If you like this story, support me by subscribing to the channel. I'm putting in the effort for you, and your subscription helps me grow. Also, don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Your opinion really matters to me.